All right. So before we start, I already said this when it was just me and the panelists in the waiting room, but thank you very much for volunteering your time and energy to participate in this event. Your support is really appreciated. And we're all very excited to have you here, so thank you very much. And before we get started with the event, really quickly, I'd just like to go over a few housekeeping details for our attendees. First, please make sure that you're muted. You can turn your cameras on if you want, especially when we get to the Q&A section and you're asking questions. Once we get to the free Q&A, I would ask that you please raise your hand by clicking the raise hand button to ask a question, and then I'll ask you to unmute to ask your question. I'll also be monitoring the chat, but I'll be prioritizing people who are asking questions that way. Second, this event is being recorded, as you can see. It will be sent out to all our registrants, and it will also be uploaded to the Career Success YouTube channel, so non-registrants will be able to watch it as well. And and third, I will be sharing a link to a resources document with everyone who signed up for this event. It contains some links to some basic online resources related to the grad program search, as well as job searching in the environmental field. It's fully editable, fully accessible. So if you have any resources or opportunities that would be helpful to your fellow students, feel free to add that to that document. And it also is accessible to anyone, not just people with UCSC emails, so you can share it with anyone you find who might find it useful. So I will be emailing that out after the event, along with some notes that I will be taking from the discussion. Okay. If you have any logistical questions, please just PM me in the chat, and I'll try to respond to you. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So we have 4 wonderful panelists here today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves. So please just say your name, tell everybody what university you're from and what degree program you're affiliated with there. Faculty panelists, if you could say your title as well, that would be great. And give a brief description of your research interests, the current research that you're conducting. I'll just put that information in the chat. So I'll just go in alphabetical order by last name. So Chi, would you be able to go first?
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this virtual event, and thank you so much for having me. My name is Sochi Claire, as you just heard, and I'm currently working on my PhD. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and I'm doing my PhD in marine biology, and my research area is climate change biology and looking at how things like marine heat waves affect some of our really important marine resources like seafood. So that's what I spend a lot of my time doing. Aside from that, I also at UC Santa Cruz, I did 2 majors. I got my degree in marine biology and I also got my degree in theater arts. So connecting with people is something that I still do, and I still do it in an artistic way in my PhD program. So aside from doing science, I spend a lot of time communicating that science in media and in a lot of different other platforms. And I'm happy to talk more about that.
Then I just realized that apparently I don't know how alphabetical order works. So Professor Burry, would you like to introduce yourself next?
I was thought you were using their first name going reverse. That was totally fine with me. Hi, my name is Jeff Burry, and I am a faculty member, a professor in the Department of Environmental Studies at UC Santa Cruz. I'm also the faculty director of the Center for Integrated Spatial Research, which does most of the GIS and geospatial training and research on campus. My research interests right now are 2 big projects. I'm working on one on climate change in the Andes, largely revolving around glacier recession and its impacts on hydrologic systems as well as social systems. And the other one I work a lot on is our extractive industries, particularly mining, mostly in Latin America right now.
And then Raymond, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks. Yeah. Hi, I'm Raymond Lebeau. I'm a citizen of the Pit River tribe in Northeastern California. I'm a master's student at San Francisco State in the GI Science or Geographic Information Science program in the geography department. And I did my undergrad at UCSC, where I studied environmental studies and philosophy. And today my research interests look at montane meadow restoration in the Sierra Nevada, and using drone surveys to map the meadow and to assess the restoration using a variety of interdisciplinary methods. So thanks for having me and thanks for being here.
Thank you. And then last but not least, Professor Rivaslada, would you be able to introduce yourself? I believe you're muted, sorry.
I was going to change that at the last minute, I forgot, sorry. Yes, my name is Charles Rivaslada. Good afternoon, everyone. I am presently a senior lecturer at San Jose State University in the Urban and Regional Planning Department, overseeing some of the master's students in the Urban and Regional Planning Department major, which is also extended now to geography. It includes the geography department. I'm also a research associate at the Mineta Transportation Institute, which is affiliated with San Jose State University. And I had the pleasure of teaching a course in the fall at UCSC in environmental studies, and I enjoyed it very much. It was on green cities. But primarily, I then actually teach then at San Jose State in the areas of transportation planning, both regional and local transportation planning, as well as sustainability. And I did teach a course on growth management and smart growth in cities, and kind of looking at the evolution of those. I am a PhD from the University of California at Davis, but did a number, well, I did my degrees, basically, master's degrees, as well as my undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley. So I have a strong link to UC Berkeley, where I've also taught classes in the past in city and regional planning. My primary areas of research have been transportation demand management, congestion management. I've worked a lot in transportation. My PhD dissertation was actually on transit coordination in the United Kingdom and its reforms, but also looking at transit coordination in countries in the developing world, primarily in Chile, where I've done a lot of research, as well as South Africa. I'm also very interested in governance, as well as transport for persons with disabilities, where I've done some work in Cape Town in South Africa. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourselves. So first, I have a few general questions that I've prepared to ask to our panelists based on the questions from the registration form. Seeing as how we have quite a few attendees, and I'm sure you all have your own questions you'd like to ask, I'll try to keep this section short. But just to start off with, I have a question for our student panelists, but if anybody has an answer, feel free to share it. So first question, how did you choose your current graduate program? How did you find out about it, and sort of how did it fit your interests?
Who would you like to start?
Either one, anybody can start, but if you would like to start, go for it.
Well, I think mine's short. I was in the environmental studies department and found GIS partly through Barry Nickel, as well as Professor Burry, kind of just wandering around the ENVS department and taking courses, and kind of got, I went through the intro course, and luckily that year they had just created an intermediate and a more kind of advanced or seminar class, senior exit class in GIS. And so once I kind of moved forward with that, I realized that's something I wanted to pursue further and gain more skills. And I felt like I wasn't really, I was needing more skill sets before kind of pursuing maybe like later on visions for my academic career. And so, yeah, I ended up looking into programs, and I found out that San Francisco State has a really great GIS program. Actually, one of the firsts in the CSU system, and then there's good relationships. Professor Burry and connections with Barry Nickel to SF State, and so it really worked out kind of perfectly. So.
That's awesome. And I guess that kind of thinking back to when I was finishing in my third year, moving into my graduate program, I find that a lot of people have similar stories, like Ray and myself, where they've stumbled upon X persons who helped be like a good mentor, a good anchor for finding out application deadlines, how to talk to professors about potentially working with them. And so I think that that was really big and important part. And so I would just recommend to anyone, when you find an area where you think that maybe this is where I want to go with this, you're going to need like a strong group of people to write letters and things like that. So if they're graduate students, if there's professors that you think that you kind of, maybe, you feel like you can connect with, that would be a really good place to start. Myself, I think one big part of me kind of making that transition into my program was doing a research experience or undergraduate program. And what that is it's called an REU. You might hear that. And NSF has positions for undergraduate to essentially kind of do science research summer camp, where you go to another institution and you pick up research skills. You pick up what is it like to be, working in a day-to-day in the environment that I think I want to do my PhD or my master's work in, or even later on in whatever other field. And I would definitely recommend that I did mine at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And that helped me just really see, okay, well, initially I was going to apply to an oceanography program, but then I realized, well, I really do like ecology. And they're two very big different things. So it was really good to have that summer and see that, oh gosh, yes, ecology is what I want to do. That means that, in our field, typically having a connection with a professor prior to applying is something that I needed to do. So you can stumble about, but nowadays there are plenty more programs where you don't have to be lucky and you don't have to stumble around like many of us did. You can actually have a structured program. NSF has a lot of them. UC Santa Cruz has them, where you can have that mentorship a little bit more clearly established to get you to graduate school.
Thank you. And actually that leads really well into my next question. What did you do as an undergraduate student at UCSC that prepared you for graduate school? So that program is one thing, but for both you and Raymond, was there anything else that you would recommend for our undergraduate attendees to do to prepare?
So there was some surprising translations that happened. I was involved with a lot of student orgs on campus, including like Student Union Governance Board and SUA and like Student Alliance of North American Indians, and then like the American Indian Resource Center. And a lot of those kind of roles like translated really well into being able to sit in a faculty room and communicate in meetings or serve as like a grad student representative. So that getting these leadership skills, which built your confidence and also your connections with people and your experience public speaking and you know, after so many times of standing up in front of a crowd of people at an event, you kind of get used to it. So then you're standing in front of the classroom presenting, and it's more familiar. And so like those types of skills like contributed, I think, to this ability to transition into grad school in interesting ways. Of course, like in terms of like research interests, like I guess I kind of fall under more stumbling around, but like I got really interested in like meadows and like coastal prairies in the Central Coast area, and that kind of like research stuff I was doing in classrooms, and like in political ecology or different classes, I like built up these internal interests that I had and kind of figured it all kind of culminated to GIS being a way to try to explore these questions I had and I still have today. And so, yeah, I think my answer at this point would be similar to my first one, which was, you know, I was fortunate to get to take those GIS courses. But I think a way that you could prepare is, you know, some grad programs have prerequisites that you need. So say you're interested in doing GIS at SF State, for example, there are courses you can take once you get into the program to kind of lead up, or, you know, any other master's or PhD program. But if you work on, you know, if you know you're interested in it and you work on it while during your undergrad, then you build a foundation, which when you get to the grad program, you know, you have satisfied, and it lets you, you know, just have a good foundation. And then from there you can build up. And I think one thing I would say else to that is, at least in my experience, a master's isn't a place where you're going having needed all those skills, but it's a place you go and you acquire those skills and you refine them. So you don't have to have so much weight on like, you know, oh, I need to be at that level to get involved. It's like, no, you go there to advance yourself and your research interests. So a little bit of, hopefully that was clear, but yeah, I think in summary, I think it's having, you know, a little bit of a plan, and also, you know, having confidence in yourself.
That was so well said. Yes, and I definitely feel like at UC Santa Cruz, the secret is that we have such an amazing learning environment, an exploratory learning environment that really is what you do, kind of moving on and moving forward. Like Ray said, once you're done with your academic little, you know, when you're done with school, you're a leader. And so why not practice that now and allow yourself to really kind of have those questions. I know we're in a virtual capacity right now, and I know that a lot of what I did in terms of exploring was using Santa Cruz's natural space to explore. But if you can continue to try to push yourself to ask just small questions, even if they're not really related to your coursework, those are the things that actually kept me going. It was not easy for me to get through my calculus and chemistry classes, but by talking to my professors afterwards about, well, I know we're learning about ATPase, but in the big picture, what does this actually mean in your life, in your work, and in the work that's happening in the real world, in our world? So we're in a tumultuous time. So big thinkers, we're gonna really need all the big thinkers we can get. So really push yourself, even if it's hard, even if you feel like this isn't really my area. You know, just ask those questions. And I think that's kind of indirectly how I kind of ended up preparing for graduate school and things like that. And I definitely would just say that having a plan, like Ray said, can be helpful too. So if you know that broadly STEM is kind of where I'm going, I think that if someone had told me, oh, you might need to know how to code, like 5 years ago, I would have definitely done that. So at least have a plan to get some skills while you can, and that will help you later, I think.
And then just a final general question. What does your day-to-day life look like as a graduate student? What does your research practice consist of on a day-to-day basis?
I guess I'll jump in since it's kind of how it's been back and forth between me and Sochi. Um, so we had like a GIS day event at SF State last year before pre-COVID, and my presentation I gave, I sort of described like the process of working with these tools that we get, and so like the day-to-day practice is kind of, at least for me, like it's very plugged in to the softwares you're working with, and then kind of mixing in like reading of like literature and journal articles. But you get used to it, that's what I was saying at the GIS days. Like it becomes a tool you're kind of used to working with. So you can kind of do stuff on the fly, or over time at least this is just, again, like my experience, like building that ability to kind of just work through these softwares and know where the tools are. So then it's more of like a toolbox, and it's not so much like like a really complicated thing, but just something where you have these tools and you can use them. It's like you're building a bench or something. So you kind of can work and research, what do I need to do to answer this question? So it kind of feels like a lot of puzzle solving, and then I can use my toolbox to try to answer some of those puzzles. And then I think day to day for like graduate studies, you can be expected to spend a great deal of time reading through articles in the literature, and TA work, and depending on which class you're involved with. So we're on semesters, and so it's pretty consistent, week by week, the amount of work you have, and it really varies with how much you put on your plate. So I know that was kind of an ambiguous answer, but I do think it'll vary between the person's lifestyle and workload, and because there's graduate students who work full time at the same time as going to school, and that adds another slew of factors to it. And I kind of think the situation I'm in is slightly unique in that, just given like my background, and I've been fortunate to receive like financial support for tribal students. And so that has allowed like me to focus on my studies full time. So that's kind of a plug to, if you can find ways to get financial support, I really wish students had the ability to go to school and focus on their studies full time, and kind of have that cycle. So then, your day-to-day can involve enjoying or trying to, work through all these things without the stresses of the other things. But yeah, long-winded and abstract. Sorry.
I don't know if we'll be covering this later, but I think a lot that makes undergraduate experience, at least for me, a lot different than graduate experience is if there are things that you want to add to your toolbox, you can make that a part of your schedule. I mentioned coding. That's one of those things that I wanted to add to my toolbox. So I'm taking a mathematical modeling class now. And so you can take classes as a graduate student, and depending on the university that you go to, they may have a different kind of structure of how they want you to take classes. They may want you to get a lot of coursework done in the first 2 years if you're doing a PhD. They may, like my department, UCSB, have very little structure where it's like, figure out what you need and then take those classes. And so there's no, I feel like every departmental structure will have its pros and its cons. So in my case, I didn't know what I needed exactly right away. So my first 2 years was spent a lot of time talking with professors, a lot of time doing a lot of informational meetings, and learning more about what I don't know, essentially, so that I can start to carve out a schedule that that really supported my knowledge path. And I think that what's also really kind of great about graduate school is you get to kind of pick, to a degree, who you work with. So at least in the fields of ecology and marine biology, sometimes you apply to work with a specific advisor. And that means that you can get a sense and you can gauge from their students, is this a 9 to 5 lab? Is this a 6 a.m. starting kind of lab? What works best with your schedule? Is this advisor used to advising people who may have a family, in which case everybody in this lab has a family, so they all want to be home before 4. So that's stuff that you can really kind of sort out before you accept a position in a research group, if that's the kind of situation that you'll be applying into. And so at least now, even still in a virtual capacity, I spend a lot of time doing things like outreach, like we're doing right now. And that's because I really wanted to be a part of a research group that prioritized outreach. I really wanted to be a part of a research group that allowed me to do lab work. As part of university, it has a strong diving program. Not everybody comes into graduate school of marine biology ready to dive, and that wasn't me. So I wanted to have time to develop those skills, and that's what my time was spent doing. So I think that it's a lot of like choose your own adventure. Of course you're busy, but it's also you're loading your schedule with things that will make you more equipped to do your research.
Thank you. And that also sort of leads into my next question, which I'd like to get the perspective of our faculty panelists for this one. What advice do you have for prospective graduate students for making connections with faculty members? And in terms of doing that, to find a program, to find a specific research group at a program, or in a mentorship capacity. So whoever has has something to say first, feel free to speak up.
Okay, sorry about that. Doing it again. I think I would certainly look at connections. I know in my own case, certainly at San Jose State, there have been a lot of connections that have been facilitated through, for example, student work at the affiliated Mineta Transportation Institute, MTI, which is slightly off campus, but I think is a very important source of research, important source of employment as well for students. So I think going through certainly, and you mentioned mentorships, as well as other sorts of faculty connections, I think they're very instrumental in perhaps more of a complete education on the part of students. Now, of course, it's primarily catering to grad students, but certainly there are undergrad students as well that are involved. So if and I'm not totally, I should be, but I'm not totally familiar with all of the institutes at UCSC that would be directly linked certainly to, let's say, environmental studies or other similar disciplines. But I know that they are there, they do exist, and that I think close contact perhaps with job opportunities through, be it, even if it's like, I'm not sure if there actually are opportunities, for example, in the summer for working in these areas, but, anything that's small, sometimes unpaid, I think is important in working through perhaps what the student that's becoming, of course, a grad student then can learn from and can build on. I think going into the graduate kind of the graduate level education. So I would, yeah, that's one of the areas that I think there's a lot of strength in a student getting to know, having, first of all, having the interest, let's say in transportation, in the case of MTI, the Minetta Transportation Institute, and then pursuing that through contacts with professors that may be working on projects. Very often, I've had students have done this at MTI, and then being able to be part of the research team, very often with other professors and students from other universities, so that then there's you're not only they're not only learning from then from their own professors, let's say at San Jose State or UCSC, but also with perhaps professors as well as students from other universities. So I guess that would be my long-winded answer to that. That's one of the areas I see as could be a strength for students to pursue.
Yeah, hi. I forgot to mention actually one of the more important and relevant reasons why I'm probably on this panel. I'm also the graduate director for our program. So I manage, our program has about 53 graduate students this year. So I sort of manage, I guess, all of that and all the students that I work with. And I thought maybe I might address this kind of roundabout a couple of questions in the back too. One of the interesting things is, how do people find us and how do we find them in terms of our graduate studies? And I have a pretty good perspective on this because I've seen how all the rest of our faculty make contact or are in touch with the students they're interested in working within our program, but also over the past decade or so, students who I've ended up working with. And I think there are a couple of really key ways in which one might actually make connections, so to speak, with faculty. And the first thing I've always noticed is the students who are really well informed about what I'm doing really helps for us to have a good conversation about the things they might be interested in. So I'm not suggesting you go out and read all their research, but it's always a good thing to know a little bit about what they do and what they're interested in and where their work might be heading and how it might have evolved in the past. So, we have the internet today. It's easy to use Google Scholar, things like that. But the couple of things outside of actually your studies that are sort of important is I've met a lot of students at professional meetings. So whether it's conferences for actual disciplines or interdisciplinary conferences or other things, or as a panelist in many cases, we had lots of very, very good and interesting conversations with students who've been on panels with us, came to the panel meetings. So those kinds of interactive forums and meetings and things are a really good place to meet with people. We've had a lot of really good interchange with students at talks, at things like this, or at other universities or in other environments. Being a student in someone else's class usually helps a lot. So I had Ray and I were just talking about one of the classes he was in with me. And I think it helped shape some of the things he thought about in terms of the future. So being in classes, and not just sort of a large lecture class, but as you develop your final year or so in the university as an undergraduate, you might want to consider, who is it you're going to do your senior exit with at UCSC? It's sort of, do you do a thesis? Do you want to be in someone's seminar? Do you want to be in part of a summer program? Do you want them to supervise your internship? Because all these people will eventually be people who hopefully support your candidacy to a graduate program as well. And then I think the other thing I wanted to point out is that social media today is extremely valuable. One can easily use Twitter, but I really think for our program, environmental studies has concertedly put all the faculty have made a concerted effort to put themselves on LinkedIn for a very good reason, because we actually all wanted to basically allow our students to join the social media networks that we are all part of. So you could find some of the professional experiences and other things that you might be interested in without necessarily contacting us. You could do it virtually. And then the last thing is, don't be afraid to send someone an email. That's actually probably where 90% of the contact that I have with students, and the students that I've ended up working with have largely done so primarily through sending me an email initially. And then we started conversing, set up Zoom talks, things like that. So yeah.
Thank you. I just have one more general question, and then I'll open the floor to student questions, because I know that at least one of our panelist, Professor Rivaslada, you have to leave at 6:20. So I'll just ask this last prepared question so that we still have time. What skills do you think are helpful for students to have in the program that you're affiliated with? Like when you see a student who is really succeeding, what skills do you see that they have or develop over the course of their time in your program?
I could mention, if that's okay, I could mention the Master of Urban Planning program at San Jose State. I think also I could say for the city and regional planning at Berkeley as well. Certainly, good writing skills. I think those are very, very important. I think that's really fairly basic. Good organizational skills, of course. Good communication skills, communication not only with obviously professors and instructors, faculty in the department, but also with other students and with professionals in the field, be it, in the case of the urban planning department, individuals at San Jose State, getting to know a little bit better and a little bit more about individuals at the city of San Jose, at regional governments, regional planning entities, city and county of San Francisco, where I forgot to mention I worked for 28 years as well. So all of these are very, very important, I think. Certainly GIS skills, and I think that's become more and more, again, that's a kind of a basic, would almost be a basic response, but I think it's important to mention. When I was certainly doing the PhD over 20 years ago now, I did take a GIS class, but things have changed so much now. I'm sure I wouldn't understand what necessarily all of what's going on now, but it's so very, very important, and not only at the graduate program level, but also as a professional, let's say as a professional planner, where I worked for a number of years. Just retired actually last year. And so it's very, very important to have that GIS is, again, backing up your work and visually being able to illustrate a lot of the points that you want to make about specific, for example, in my case, policies or specific tendencies or directions that you find within a population that you're closely analyzing. So I think those are important. Are there any other? I think quantitative skills are also, you'll get that as a grad, obviously, in most grad programs, but I think that's also very important, again, to be able to quantify a lot of the work you're doing. So much of what you're doing will be both quantitative and qualitative, but I think you have to kind of understand the quantitative side in a lot of in a lot of the results that you're going to bring forward of your work. Otherwise, it's much easier to certainly shoot holes through perhaps some of the work that you've done, unless you have some base, I think. So those would be my suggestions.
Do you want me to weigh in on that, Jess?
Yes, thank you.
I think a lot of the same things that Charles mentioned. I wrote down my list while Charles was talking. Some of it was the same thing. The real basic skills are really obvious almost immediately when choosing to consider someone for graduate work. It shows up in the very first line of their application usually, and that is the ability to write and the ability to think critically. On top of that, it's not something that's always so obvious. So your ability to write well, but also to write about something critically and effectively is a different question. It's sort of the next level up, which is really, really important for graduate studies, because there are certain things that we cannot go back and relearn once we enter a graduate program. Those are things that they're too hard. We can adjust them, we can enhance them, we can improve them, but there are some basic skills that are really, really important for beginning graduate studies, because they aren't really that long, the programs. Even a PhD program may sound like it lasts a long time, but it's a highly structured experience that requires a lot of sort of short-term goals and projects. And so it's really difficult to help students who find themselves in difficult positions. Some of the things I really look for, and I think a lot of faculty look for, is students who are really able to identify problems well. What is the problem we're trying to address? Problem solving is a real key question around a lot of graduate work, but also the ability to synthesize discussions about that problem. How has everybody else talked about it? X, Y, and Z. How do they all fit together? Where is the likely next step for a lot of these questions and resolution? So it's not just doing critically and being able to write, but it's sort of all of those things put together, which I think are really are hard to demonstrate sometimes in an application, but usually show up really easily along the way through some of the materials and things that you have to do to apply to a program. Now, there are a number of toolkits that are extremely useful. And I wrote down a few things, in the computer tech side of things. Being able to code is a really handy skill. Python, for example, other sorts of R. Being able to do that in industry, R is in Python. GIS, statistics, field work, and experience. All those things really come in very useful in a graduate program, because it'll allow you to do a lot of the research or participate in research efforts up front. So developing what I call a toolkit to help you address the problems that you're likely to work on is one of the things that are really important for moving forward in graduate school. I think a strong track record of successfully completing projects and achieving goals is something that can never be understated. So you may have started a lot of projects and not finished them, and it'll be really kind of figure that out along the way. But being able to successfully achieve those goals you set, usually through completing degrees, completing programs, the training, et cetera, is usually pretty easily identified. But along the way, also, I think being able to work well with others. And this sounds sort of, yeah, of course, that's important, but it actually is extremely important, because most of the research we do today and most of the problem solving and addressing questions that are important to us involve groups of people trying to work together to solve the problem. And so one of the things that environmental studies has always focused on, and we do this in a lot of different ways, is how do we work together well as a group to address a bigger question? And so I really like to point that out. And I guess the last thing that I would point out is this, have the ability to ask a few people to address all of the things I just mentioned well. And so that means actually being able to ask some people who have served as your mentors, as your advisors, or as your bosses in many cases, to sit down and be able to write you a really good letter of recommendation. I can't understate that enough, that a highly personalized and a highly detailed letter of recommendation is extremely valuable for you going forward into the future. And almost all of the people who serve in those capacities know this and are willing to do so on your behalf. I always tell students, I'm more than happy to write you letters. You just need to come talk to me first, so I can help you get to where you want to go next, because we are all interested in everyone, especially people we supervise, in achieving the goals that they're looking forward to accomplishing. So, yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much for answering those questions. Now I'd like to open the floor for questions from our attendees. Again, I know that Dr. Rivaslada has to leave the meeting around 6:20, and Sochi has to leave around 6:45. So if you have questions for them, please prioritize that accordingly. And again, just so that the chat doesn't get clogged up, I would prefer you to click the raise hand button to ask your question, and then ask it over by unmuting. But if you can't do that, please just type it into the chat and I'll read it out, and I'll try to go in order of who asked first. So if anybody has any questions, please raise your hand.
Is it possible for people to put in the chat, say their major or rough level of area of interest, just to throw that out there so we all know where people are? People feel free to put that in the chat.
Do you mean like all the students attending? Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, if anybody would feel comfortable doing that, please do so. All right, so Danny, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but I saw that you raised your hand. What's your question?
Hi. So my question has to do with like reference letters. So for an application, what type of letters are they? Like, I guess personal versus like professors, because I have someone who's been like a mentor for me who I've worked with a lot, but wasn't a professor. So I don't know how that looks comparatively. And then second, I've been graduated for a year now. And if I do apply, it would be, I guess, this next fall or the following. And so I'm wondering, should I get my reference letters now so that it's not too long since I've worked under these professors, or I just don't know how it looks on an actual application.
I guess people can feel free to weigh in on this. I would say that in terms of getting your letters now, I would just make sure, and if you haven't done already, to let folks know that when you're planning on applying, and maybe keep in touch with them all the way through up until then, giving them a good 2 month heads up, maybe another 1 month check-in, keep those check-ins regular. I think I was pretty hesitant to check in at first. And then I realized that, wait, people are just really busy. It's not that they don't want to do this for you. If they've already said yes, it's very likely that they'll still want to do it later. It's just that things get really busy. So make sure to keep on checking in. And I had a good bundle of letter writers because anything can happen at that last hour. I did have to actually ask someone else to step in. So I had a good team of people just in case anything happened or things like that.
Danny, are you planning on going on to graduate school in a master's or PhD, or what are you thinking about?
Yeah, I'm not really sure specifically because I'm not sure what the end point is. Like once I have that degree and experience, where does that go? And so I'm kind of at a loss of that information to know what next steps to make.
Yeah, I would suggest that you go for the basket approach for your letters. Having some people, it's never a problem to have someone who you've worked with in professional experiences or professional training for a long period of time in your application file, and for any application, in my opinion. But if you're applying for a sort of master's program or a PhD program or something like that, you'll want to have people who can specifically address the things that a master's program or PhD program will want to see in the application. And so they'll have some track record of, you were in my class for 3 quarters, wrote a large paper for me. So I have a lot of good ability to talk specifics about how I was able to assess your abilities. And so that's one of the key things about thinking about how we craft and work with our letter writers is, what are they able to address and how does that look together as you are submitting 1 or 3 or 4. I don't think there's a timing problem necessarily. There, a lot of graduate students are now using sort of, especially for people who are applying for a lot of programs, there are a lot of ways of having files. You can have the file on call for other things. But I would say shoot for the best. The gold standard is a highly personalized letter to every program. And it will certainly help you in the long run. So spending the time and detail to keep faculty updated on things is absolutely not a problem. And it may feel like, oh, they take a long time to get back to me. It's, as Sochi just mentioned, we're all in a virtual world today, and so it's really difficult because we all have thousands of emails, but we usually get to them. But if we don't, your job is to make sure you remind us, because if we agree to it, we will absolutely do it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I agree with Jeffrey. I think timing is not such a huge problem, but I think it's very important, to keep your professors and others that you would like to ask a letter of recommendation from up to date on exactly what you're doing, what your interests are, where you're going. I would also suggest, if you've worked in a job that is somehow related to what you'd like to be getting into or what you're continuing to be in, go ahead and ask, for example, if you happen to work for a city or for a consultant in the area, let's say of transportation, I think it would be good to talk to a person that you feel that you've been in good communication with, hopefully thinks highly of you, and see if that person will give you a letter of recommendation as well, along with, and I would say if you have three, maybe one person from where you've worked, as long as of course it's a somewhat similar field. I would suggest doing that. That in my experience anyway, I think that's it's looked good if again the student has worked in an area that is somehow related or similar to the field of study that she or he is planning on applying to, as far as a department is concerned.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Does anybody else want to weigh in on that question, or can we move on to the next question? All right, we're good. All right, Jonathan.
Hello. So I have kind of a interesting question, I guess. I graduated. Can you guys hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I graduated in June 2020, and in the spring, I got my research funded and I set up my lab. And well, actually over the summer, I got it funded and I set up my lab, and then I started doing my research with my team that I had assembled. And we were all going great. We were getting good results. And then the grad strikes hit. And also the campus power outages hit too. And it was a really bad year to be doing research on the campus of UCSC. We kept on getting shut down, but we made small progresses stepping forward. And we were going to hit spring really hard. We had a whole plan. Like as soon as we come back from spring break, yeah, we are totally going to hit that lab and hit it running, because everything had settled down at that point. And then the pandemic hit. So I had like this really good research project that got funding, and I got like the initial results, but I never was able to finish it all the way through. We did adapt it a little bit so that we could continue at least working on it in a theoretical sense from remotely. And I'm just curious if like including that project would be a benefit or a hindrance when applying to grad school. Because I have like the proposal, I have the grant proposal, I have the research documentation and all of and everything, because we were planning to publish.
I don't mind addressing that, because it's, you're not alone, Jonathan. Many of our students have been delayed in variety of ways that's been really devastating for their time on campus. Many of them have not been able to go to the field. They haven't been able to travel. The labs have been closed. The fires shut down everything. It's been a really awful experience for everyone. And I extremely very sympathetic and deeply concerned for you and for everyone else, because this has been an extremely challenging time. And we're still not back to full operation on campus. Some of us who run facilities go to campus on a semi-regular basis, but not everyone's able to do what they need to do. But you should never let that affect your ability to talk about how you got a project successfully funded and were clearly well on your way to getting the work done as a clear hallmark of success. Because those are, the research process is I call it a loop. It's a big arc of happiness in many ways, right? It's coming up with the problem. It's coming up with plans to actually how we're going to address it, writing the proposal, getting it funded, doing the research, and then actually publishing it. And so if you get interrupted somewhere along that way, and it's not your fault, it's okay to explain, because we all understand this now, right? That the pandemic has delayed everyone in so many really devastating ways sometimes. So explaining, we're almost done, and we might even get some of it done after the pandemic might allow us to, go back and do some of those things. I think that's absolutely important to, and will be not you, many other people will also be doing that as they move forward into their next projects. So.
Well, I mean, like, I'm graduated now, so I'm like, I can't really jump back into it.
Well,
but
okay. I think you could still talk about how the fact that you the whole process, you were nearly completed with the process when it was interrupted for other reasons that were out of your hands, so to speak, right?
Yes. I guess I kind of have one more question too, because I was there for 3 years, and every year I started a research lab or like a research project. I only got 2 of them funded, but like I got one of them funded. I got the lab set up, got everything ready to go. And then there was like my research was, it was a research that kind of overlapped with somebody else's research proposal. So I invited that person to come into my proposal, and they kind of stole my entire lab from me. They like turned my research team that I assembled against me, and then upset the person whose lab I like obtained for us. So he got angry with me, and my professor was like, well, I can go help you set this straight, because I know you did this, you did all of the hard work and you did everything to do this. But that proposal you wrote with that other professor, that got funded. So if you want, you can just do that one. And I was like, I do want to do that one a little bit more. So plus my passion is, just seeing these things come to fruition. I like seeing like ideas that need to happen get funded.
I think as long as you show a progression, which I think you're showing, how perhaps you had a couple of projects that weren't funded, but you've shown that you were successful eventually. You've picked up a lot of those skills, a lot of that knowledge that is going to work, toward, again, further success in the future. I think you build on those, build less, don't build on the, perhaps some of the conflicts that occurred at one point. But if you can point out the areas where you're, again, showing a progression, I think that's important. And I think your willingness and your dedication, especially with this last project, just seems phenomenal. I realize other people also had that, but I think if you show that you were funded, you're all intentions, you had everything mapped out, and as Dr. Burry mentioned a few moments ago, you were stopped. It was an intervening factor you had no control over. So I would say, yeah, continue on that. Make the best of it, and highlight the positive.
Yes, and I love the responses, and I just want to talk from a place of ecology where things never go the way you plan.
Yeah.
So pre-COVID, say, you go out, you put a whole bunch of cages out with lobsters. This happened at UC Santa Barbara, actually, and this was a faculty-led project. You think the lobsters are securely, secure at the bottom of the ocean. You come back a month later, an octopus ate all the lobster, and that was a really big project. And of course, we know things happen in science. I think we were talking about critical thinking, and I think a glass half full mentality is something that whether you choose to move forward in academia, in industry, or whatever field you move into, being able to talk about your experience as a glass half full kind of spin on things. I hate to use the word spin, but honestly, that's what problem solvers are. We can take, this, and we can flip it around, and then we can go, this is the way that we're going to go. This is the way that we're going to look at it. This is what we're going to learn from this experiment, And so I think that's just going to be important it was important pre-COVID. It's going to be even more important moving forward, how we address issues like that happen. And I think you need even a leadership capacity. Right now, we're learning a lot about sensitivity. We're learning a lot about how we communicate. And so how you address snafus whenever, say, something happens in a miscommunication. I think we talked about like miscommunication. It's going to happen. But how you can move forward from that is really the part that I think future employers, whether it's your graduate supervisor or whatever other position that you do, that's what they want to hear about.
Cool. Okay. I guess I do have like an addendum to that, because I did all this research. Would it be enough to warrant, because like I really want to apply for a PhD, but I'm not actually sure if I need the master's before I do the PhD. because I've already done like research in a lab and I was getting ready to publish, but I'm not actually sure if that's enough to allow me to apply directly to PhD.
I think I could probably help you think through that a little bit. There's really no hard and fast rule for whether or not you need a master's degree or not to advance to a PhD, but there generally is some specific advice I would give you. Number one is that in the field you're wanting to work in, specifically with faculty advisors, do they believe that you need a master's degree to apply to a PhD program? So you should, what is the sort of their understanding of what's acceptable? And also, because it's very unusual to just have students come from undergraduate degrees into PhD programs, you would want to make extra special, careful, sure, I guess, to think of it in an interesting way, that everyone understands why you feel that you're ready for a PhD program without having a master's degree. So there are really no hard and fast rules. There's no route, no specific route to various degree programs. And so I always tell people it depends on what you want to do and what is your end goal. Why do you want to go into a PhD program? Where does that get you in 5 or 6 years? And so those things are actually taken all together really what matter in terms of your ability to get into a PhD program.
So that'd be like something that I would just want to talk to the professor about, or like to contact the actual program.
I would work with faculty advisors specifically about this, and I'd also ask you to think a little bit about what is getting into a PhD program allow you to do that you're ready to do, so to speak, right? Why is it? Why do you not need a master's degree? I guess usually master's degrees help people work on specific skill sets, problem focusing, how to do research, how to write up the research, things like that. And sometimes we have students, honestly, in environmental studies in our program, we have a lot of students who are really ready sometimes to move on to PhD programs. You know, they're really good. And so it just depends on where everyone's at in terms of their development intellectually. And so I can't really say that there's a specific yes or no to that answer. It does depend a little bit.
Got it.
All right, Catherine.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Hi. So I'm repeatedly told, of course, like everybody else, that the last years of our undergraduate studies should be used strategically with what professors you take, with what clubs you're in. And this, of course, is kind of stressful because I always feel I'm in several clubs, but I always feel like I'm missing out on one that might be better. And one way this is coming up for me right now is I am forming relationships with professors, and one of them in particular is very supportive. She jumped to write me a letter of recommendation. She jumped to put me up for a scholarship to do research with her, but her research focus is not necessarily something that like I know for sure I'm going to be into. And I mean, to be fair, I don't know what I'm into at this point because my interests are so broad. I'm having a hard time narrowing them down anyway. But I'm wondering if you guys think that it is necessarily a waste of time to do research with somebody whose projects you don't know for sure if you're going to be into, and that's going to be something you're going to continue, or if you still think it's just as valuable and I should go for it.
Argue that it's just as valuable, perhaps not quite as valuable, but it's valuable, let's say. And I think I would encourage you to do it as long as it's not something that is that is going to, let's say, academically harm you in any way. I don't know how that would happen, but perhaps it would take you away from an area that you're very much interested in, or that would set you back as far as time is concerned and what you want to do. You perhaps look into a little bit more the area that this professor is working in, or this professor wants you to assist her in. Find out a little bit more. Maybe there are areas that interest you a lot. Maybe you've just kind of scratched the surface at best, and need to know a little bit more, something that perhaps is going to pull you in a little bit more to what it is. what it is this professor is proposing. I think it depends. I don't think you want to stay too kind of sheltered in one specific area. You're going to want to branch out. Going to want to learn more about other areas. Just as long, of course, as it doesn't completely take you out of kind of your element and what you want to do. So it's very much up to you, I would say. It's my opinion anyway.
Thank you. I would definitely say it's not going to take me back. I would say it would advance me, if anything, because of how much skills it would introduce me to, and it would be challenging and it'd be very interesting. But yeah, like I said, I'm just worried that maybe there's a better opportunity out there for me, but I haven't discovered it yet. So perhaps I'm weighing like one bird in the hand versus two in the bush sort of thing, I guess.
I'll just share that at UC Santa Cruz, I did work in a total of 4 different research groups. And that is not including my REU experience, in which I worked at a different research group. Altogether, those experiences did inform my choice to join X lab that I'm at now. And maybe even talking to some graduate students in that group, that might give you a sense of what the day-to-day is like, if maybe you're concerned about like, will I enjoy what this work looks like all the time? I'm sensing that you're kind of like, well, I don't know what this work is like, so how am I supposed to know if I'm going to enjoy it or not? That might be a way to kind of peep in a little bit without fully moving forward in that way, perhaps. And I'm not encouraging people to just hop and be non-committal. And all of those different for dippings of toes. I had an experience that I completed. So maybe I was able to write a report, or I was able to help finish a sampling run. If you're going to dip your toe, so to speak, make sure you get something out of it. Maybe you don't like the day-to-day of what's going on, but you can get a proposal writing experience out of it, where somebody teaches you how to, write up an abstract. Maybe you get to present your work. So maybe less thinking of like what I do in this experience is what's going to be my job. It's more like, what can I get out of this that's going to make me really wear that banner of undergraduate researcher, what it means to be a researcher in undergrad.
Thank you.
Raymond, do you have any feedback on that question?
Yeah, I think it could even be like a little more, just broad too. Like one thing I wrote down when I was thinking about tonight was being open to new things. As an example, have sort of moved into areas like I'd never thought I was going to, working on a research team. For example, working in geomorphology with a geomorphologist at SF State. It wasn't the focus of my undergrad. I liked GIS and environmental management, but moving, into these new research projects where I'm working on new topics, I found, I actually do have an interest for these topics, and they are informative and helpful. And I think all those experiences can be good, as long as, you sometimes you need to know how to say no, and that's not in all cases. So that could just be you're involved with too many orgs, say for example, and you're like, hey, this is kind of hindering my ability to work on these other things that I'm trying to further myself on, even though I like being involved. So there are cases like that, but I think in general I can say like being open to those new things can be good. And I think also knowing we don't have to have it figured out right away. And especially, like I said, during my undergrad, I wasn't doing like earth science and learning about, studying geomorphology. And then I kind of found that and, explored that more through courses at SF State. And so, it's a learning process. So it's not, and it doesn't end. So kind of having a little bit of, take that kind of stress off a little bit. But yeah, also I would just echo a lot of what everyone else said. Those were really great advice.
Do you mind if I just wanted to add one thing? Catherine, I understand your question primarily because we actually sort of tried to address your concern. And one of the things, we had a research experience for undergraduates project that was funded a few years ago. And we took 5 students from about 6 different universities. Each one of us brought 4 or 5 students to the field to work in the Andes to study climate change. And nearly all of us chose students, aside from 1 or 2 students who really had specific interests in this specific topic. We brought students who are really interested in interdisciplinary research or other broader topics to actually see how field research really works, but how interdisciplinary teams function. So there were a lot of broader questions we were trying to introduce students to at the same time, as well as how do you survive at high elevation? How do you speak Spanish? A lot of other sort of concerns that were along the way. And it was extremely valuable for the students who didn't have specific interests in this particular topic as well, because we understood what it was they would learn along the way. So don't be afraid to ask questions about, well, what other the bigger questions or bigger interests I might have, if it's not just specifically around a topic or one specific area of focus, because sometimes you can learn much broader and better, bigger goals and processes along the way.
Thank you.
Is there anything else anyone wanted to add, or should we add on to the next, move on to the next question? All right, Catherine Chen.
Yeah, thank you. So first off, I'm a graduate of 2019, so I double majored in environmental studies and psychology. So I've had a little bit of time to kind of explore the field postgraduate. And one of the things I remembered appreciating a lot while I was at UCSC is being able to just talk to grad students and hear about like, what was your pathway before you decided to pursue your specific program. I'm curious about asking our panel about what made you decide to go to graduate school or pursue higher education after your undergraduate years at the time that you did. Because right now I'm speaking to a lot of folks that, graduate studies wasn't something they jumped to directly after their undergraduate years. It started maybe like a little bit later, maybe at a time where it made sense to kind of round out their career or help bridge to the next stage. So I just wanted to know, like, from your own experience, like, what was that reason for you for the specific time you chose to pursue graduate school?
I can jump in.
Go ahead, Ray. Go ahead.
Okay.
Raymond, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So in my case, I have like, there's a lot of ways you can go about. There's people in my courses right now who, are returning back to or coming to grad school 20 years later after doing a field of engineering, or I have friends who have taken those breaks and worked in the different sectors in engineering or management and got skills and then kind of found their interests, by going out into the world and coming in and figuring out academia was one way they wanted to go about it. I just figured, the path that fit for me was continuing through. So I followed the undergrad with the following semester at SF State, and just keeping that consistent thing just worked for my interests. And I in my situation, wanted to keep up with the skills I was learning, after my senior year in the GIS courses. I just wanted to keep moving because it, the softwares update every year, and I knew I had a lot of work to do. And there's another, number of ways it could have went about it. There's certificate programs as well that I know people have been involved with. But in my case, I just knew I wanted to pursue and stay busy in the master's program and figure it out there. And also, it would be, it's good to kind of come at it with with a plan. I kind of just flowed into it. So I got a little bit lucky in that sense. I was fortunate to just have like people immediate in my life who, could provide a letter of recs or that support. So the decision was was mainly just, I knew that was the route that, I wanted to continue going. I wanted to keep working on that, but there are plenty of other ways to go about it. So it's not a one way thing. So.
I think I did it in a couple of different ways. I started off actually in geography as an undergrad at Berkeley. Was very interested in urban geography primarily, and went right into a Latin American Studies program, master's program at Berkeley, and did a lot of work in urban geography, but also, as it turned out, did a lot of work in demography and planning. So finished that, kind of went off into the real world, I guess, for a while, but then realized that planning was really the forte that I felt I had anyway, urban planning primarily, but also kind of picking up some of the skills that I had learned along the way, development studies, for example. And so ended up going back to Berkeley again a number of years, 4 or 5 years later, into a double major master's in urban city and regional planning and transportation engineering, so that I could sort of have also the quantitative, I had no engineering background, quantitative background in transportation as well. I was told if you did the Master of Science, then that would kind of help out in, maybe some of the city planning meetings where you'd be asked to kind of explain why you were proposing certain policies or supporting certain policies. And so I think that's a good example of kind of, doing it, both ways. You can kind of do it one or the other way, kind of depending on, I guess, where you are in your life. Because then for the PhD, that was after I was already in planning, firmly in planning, and then going back a few years after the master's, the double master's in city and regional planning and engineering. So I think, you can work it both ways. I would almost think that between the master's and the PhD, there probably should be a few years, though, maybe a year where you go out and work and get a little bit, get a little bit grounded. I would say, but for the master's, again, maybe not, having done it both ways, maybe it's not as important. It really is what you want to do and what you want to get out of the master's experience.
Do either of our other panelists want to weigh in on that question?
Sure. Yeah. So I, just like Ray, in my final year of undergrad, applied to go straight into a PhD program. And that was because I felt that I had been able to really, as I told you guys, I worked in 4 labs. So I kind of got a sense of, okay, this is something that definitely has interested me enough to spend this many chunks of hours of my day to do. And I definitely I need more skills in order to be able to do the kind of research I want to do. A PhD program seems like a great place to get those skills. And that's kind of how I moved into that track. And I would say that definitely, I mentioned before, the research experience or undergrad experience really helped me feel actually like I could apply from undergrad to graduate school. I'll say for anyone who's trying to do that, find yourself an anchor mentor, because that people, they'll be very helpful in kind of giving you that strong application that you would need as being an undergrad. And kind of what we're talking about, learning how to, like all these wonderful professors here just helped write a wonderful personal statement for someone by spinning your experiences and helping you look at your experiences and how you might actually be qualified. So I wouldn't, if you're nervous about it, just know that you'll need you'll need some support, it's definitely possible. And for me, it was also because in my field, typically people do, as was mentioned before, take some time to work in conservation management, potentially work in other fields. That being said, volunteering is kind of a big part of that. And at the time, I just wasn't financially able to do that. And so I was able to find programs that actually, this called a bridge to doctorate program, and it provides financial support for, exceptional undergraduates that are applying to graduate school, giving them that financial support, giving them not only financial support but professional development support in the first year of graduate school. So that's within the UC system, but there are other programs that are like that, that are designed to say, hey, we know you're qualified, but we know you also are a young person, whether or not in age, but also maybe in terms of life experience, and we'll help you get there. That being said, because I didn't take that time off, I definitely am very mindful of that in terms of my workload. So I try my best to really schedule moments where I'm doing something for me. It's not for school. It's maybe it is free time, but maybe it is also picking up certain skills that, say, if I took that time off, I would have gained in just working with the average society. College is a bubble. You don't get to talk to people, like real people, that often. And so pushing myself to be a part of my community, wherever that might be, volunteering, doing beach cleanups, actually, when I moved to Santa Barbara, I became a snowy plover docent, and I monitored the birds, and I got to meet a lot of the elderly people in town, and that was a good way to like break away from that. So it's important, whether or not you go from undergrad to grad or you take some time off, it's about becoming a well-rounded individual either way.
Thanks, Joss. I'm going to have to take off now. I wanted to thank my fellow panelists as well as participants, and of course to you as well, Joss. Thanks for your invitation, and I wish everyone well, and it's been a pleasure. So hope to see you at some point, either in Santa Cruz or in San Jose. So take care. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
All right. If anybody else has another question, oh, sorry, Catherine, did you have any further questions or follow-ups or anything?
I don't know if Jeffrey's going to add anything onto that, but that was really solid covering of my question.
Yeah, the extreme version of that answer,
Sure
because
thing.
I did everything humanly possible to convince myself not to go into a graduate program. So I finished 2 different master's degrees. I worked for the US government. I worked in the outdoor industry. I was a concert promoter for a while. I worked graveyard shifts at grocery stores to make ends meet. And along the way, the one thing that was continuously present for me is that I really wanted to do it. And so I think that making absolutely certain that whatever it is you're going to do, that you really want to do it, is the most important thing. So you're not doing it because you have to, you're not doing it because it's the next thing, but that it is the reason why you're doing it. And I always check with graduate students, why do you want to get a PhD? And if these 2 things aren't present in part of the conversation, we usually have to talk about whether or not this is the right program for them. The number 1 is you really like to teach. And number 2 is you really like to write and do research. And those are the 2 things that, if you want to be a faculty member, they're omnipresent in your life. If you don't want to be a faculty member, if you want to go off and do some professional things, those are different skills that we would also talk about. But I always tell people, if those aren't the things that you've decided are really what you would like to dedicate a huge amount of your life energy towards, then perhaps it's not quite time. And I did everything to convince myself that's what I didn't want to do. And finally, I just really couldn't avoid it in many ways. And so, I reluctantly applied to PhD programs, but it was because that's what I feel anyway, why I was doing what I was doing. And, now I'm here, right? Old and full professor, right?
I've never heard that perspective before, so that's really interesting to know. Yeah, and all really good points. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I actually have a question from somebody who had to leave because um, she had to step out of the meeting, but she wanted to ask, will a BA versus a BS affect applying to grad school or admissions to grad school? I think, Jeffrey, you might be the most equipped to answer this question.
Not necessarily. It depends on what it is you tend to do, what graduate program you're applying to. If it's a science heavy program that requires a high level of background in physical and natural sciences, and you don't have that background, you'll have a problem. If it's a social science class or program and you are expected to have a lot of background in politics and sociology and anthropology and you don't have it, it could also be a problem. As an interdisciplinary program, we see both in our graduate student population. And we sometimes need to ask our graduate students to go back and take some other classes, some background classes, to make sure that they're at the right level for their interdisciplinary work. But for most programs, they're not quite as interdisciplinary as say ours is, and they would require a certain level of knowledge that would allow you to perform with colleagues in the same kind of classroom environment. So it would depend, I guess.
Thank you. With that, Erica, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a freshman and I was planning on applying to some internships so that I could explore what sort of research I would like to do. But I was wondering if I should be prioritizing exploring through classes first and wait until a few years later and I have more experience that way for my applications, and if people that are older than me would be prioritized to be an intern, or if I should start applying now.
The worst that could happen if you applied now would be that they would know your name. They would know that you're very, very ambitious. And they may not accept you, but you're someone that they have their eye on. So it depends on the position. I would usually, because I was the kind of person that kind of applied for things, and then the person would then sit me down and be like, wait a minute, like, this is not what you think it is. And then they would recommend me to somebody else. So sometimes that initial process could be a starter for something else. You don't really know until you try, kind of like how, especially when you're so green, that all of these job titles, it's almost hard to even know what they mean. So that's kind of what I did. But yeah, I would do both at the same time if you can, because for me, in order to find the relevance in some of my molecular biology classes, I had to really, see how important it was a little bit hands-on, because not everybody is somebody that thrives in a really big lecture hall environment, and especially now in a big virtual lecture hall environment. So I think those hands-on experiences early on, it was kind of reversed for me. Those hands-on experiences early on helped me see the importance of my coursework. It helped me really want to do my coursework when it felt really hard to do it.
My only caveat or caution, which I oftentimes tell the interns I'm working with, having worked with, I guess, thousands of them at this point, as their supervisor, is just make sure that it doesn't interrupt or interfere with your schedule for your courses, for your time commitments, so that you can balance them effectively. Because at your first year or two is absolutely critical that you get through the sort of foundational courses you need to get through, and that you do it well, and so that you don't want something taking a lot of your time, even if you really love it, which I'm sure a lot of us do in our internships. It's those getting through that first couple of years is really important in terms of time management, which can oftentimes be extremely difficult, I found. So as a prime victim of over extenuating commitments, I can tell you that very clearly. Yeah.
Raymond, do you have anything to add to that, or should we move on to the next question?
I think that was great advice that the panelists had. Yeah, and I don't know if I have anything else to add.
All right, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you all. I don't know, this is perhaps actually a very similar question, but I'm a third year now. Yeah, I've found several interests. I'm actually a game design major, but I decided to do the minor in sustainability. So obviously I haven't quite figured out where I really want to focus. I guess either like, should I be thinking about this as I should try to find like some interdisciplinary grad program where I could farther that, or should I like try to figure out a focus kind of now and sort of, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out how I should figure out what I really want to do in the time I have. Yeah, that's basically.
Yeah. As a theater artist, theater arts and marine biology double major from UC Santa Cruz, I will say that I came across that question a lot. What really I decided is that, in terms of theater arts, the theater arts support that I needed versus the marine science support that I needed in an academic capacity. That's why I chose UC Santa Cruz, because I really wanted to build up that marine biology part, because I was doing a lot of theater arts before and during, kind of professionally anyways. So I figured, you know what, if I really want to go to school for something where I can actually get concrete skills that's going to help me, if I'm going to do both of these things, right now is the time for marine biology. That being said, I still did both of those things throughout the 5 years that I was there. That's also an asterisk right there. I did do a 5th year to buy me that time to do both majors effectively and actually complete both majors. So I would say, if you're really thinking about, okay, what do I pick? Where is the area in which you feel like you really are going to need that academic support while you're at this amazing academic institution? And where are some places where maybe if you're a really aptitude coder, if you're really aptitude at like some of these other things like computer design, where you can also get that support in another facet. UC Santa Cruz, I think, is like, I'm not really, I feel like it's a hallmark school for environmental science. So I would say that to think about that, but I wouldn't throw unless you really feel like it's your choice. Like, don't make anybody else make this choice for you. Any interest to the side, unless it's really like, okay, I really want to go this way. And I think that know that our lives are long. I think the guys, Moby Dick, he didn't know, the guy who wrote Moby Dick didn't know that he was going to be writing Moby Dick. He went on a crazy voyage that informed his life experience to write this book that we're all reading. So I think that you'll never know like how whatever experiences, whatever all the science that you might learn at UC Santa Cruz can inform your ability to be that super unique, revolutionary digital artist, gaming artist that you might be, or maybe you already are. I just don't know about it. So I would just think about it as like, where can I get my skills? That's kind of what I did, and then now I'm at a place where I'm like, okay, I can kind of put them together. I'm still sorting that out, but I just have to be patient with myself. When you have a lot of interest, you have to be patient. I think we talked about overloading and overworking and thinking long haul about, where are my priorities right at this moment.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think if I was, I'm not super familiar with the game design, but there is a broader view of, an undergraduate education and the foundations, and yeah, you go in your separate ways, but there are some broader patterns. And I think, like Professor Burry mentioned earlier, like some of the major skills that, they look for in applicants, and figuring out which tools, which may be useful, and what areas, you would like to work on, or and then having those strong foundations, and then, keeping your options open. I think there's plenty of stories of, figuring different research interests later on, or crossing disciplinary boundaries, and so there's so many opportunities. But yeah, I think there's been great advice so far, in terms of like, what they look for, like writing skills alongside the quantitative skills, and like emphasis on synthesis, and understanding, what academia, how it is, and reading and writing and doing field work or research, or, maybe you get involved with another research organization where you're out in the field collecting data, or, doing something new, and then that sparks a new interest, which, it leads into some of your own understandings you already have. And yeah, like I was a double major. I studied philosophy alongside environmental studies, and the two can, philosophy informs so much of things in academic thinking. So it was a form of enrichment. And going through that, it was questions like, well, what am I really interested in, and I kind of, especially as a philosophy major, you were really overthinking it. And so, but yeah, you kind of just have to follow your gut too sometimes, and try to, yeah. Yeah, I mean, having good foundation too.
Maybe actually like talking about how you're wishy-washy sounds really horrible, but sort of at that, like, is there a good way, say that, when I'm applying to grad school, if I don't really know exactly, which way I want to go at that point still. Are there particularly interdisciplinary grad programs or grad programs with more flexibility, and how would I find that? Or is that not? Yeah.
Well, yes, and yes. So it depends on how flexible you want, how interdisciplinary do you want to be? Because there are programs that are just 100%, that's just, we are in, we just do, we are an interdisciplinary kind of group. And so in my case, I wanted to be able to bring theater arts perspectives into marine science disciplines. So what I did was I found an advisor, and we talked about like designing your graduate school experience that would be okay with having, when you do your PhD, you have a committee that kind of helps you guide the road of your PhD projects. And she was comfortable with having people on the committee that were within the marine sciences, and then maybe one person that was in education, thinking about maybe a more art style of education. And so that in that way, that's how I'm able to embed, my interests to do interdisciplinary work into my departmental structure. And so by having, say, an ally in my advisor, she can help me, look at the departmental structure, look at what's required of you. I think we talked about foundation. I'm not able to do any of my crazy interdisciplinary stuff until I pass my major exams, until I really show that I can do all the science, and all that stuff, and the departmental kind of, boxes are checked. And so I feel like when we're doing these kinds of, uncharted water type combinations of interests, we really do need to be strong in all of those quantitative areas that we talked about, and all of the foundational areas we talked about, in order to really, in a way, say, I'm capable of this. I can do this. And so that's the kind of my trajectory in that sense. So you can go on the far end of the section where you're like shooting specifically for interdisciplinary graduate programs, or even further, if you wanted to do post PhD, there are interdisciplinary institutions. I think SFSU has an interdisciplinary education kind of postdoctoral scholar positions that you can look into. So there are lots of that. And then there's more traditional where it's kind of like, hey, I'm still going to be, one of my friends was in the math department, but she was a wonderful silks dancer. And so she was able to take some of that stuff that she had really wanted to use and embed it into her kind of like math foundation, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you so much for help.
Kyle, I would just say, don't let your divergent interests stymie the way you approach them. Let them inform how you think of the world, because sometimes by creatively approaching them, as Sochi's pointed out, you can address and approach things in extremely unique and interesting ways. And I'll just give you one real world example. One of the graduate students I supervised when I was working up in San Francisco was fascinated by pre-Columbian civilizations and the Aztec empire in particular, and ended up using that as combining it with his GIS skills to put together sort of a GIS framework for the Triple Alliance, and was eventually hired to work on, I think, the video game Civilizations, because it made complete sense that he understood all of those trade networks. So it was one of those things I was like, of course they did, because no one else ever had those skills until he approached them with, like, hey, look, I've already done all this. So so don't be afraid to think of, you know, the world in a unique way, because it's sometimes what makes us very unique in terms of our training.
Oh, that's a really cool story. Thank you.
All right, Jonathan, you had another question?
Yes, I was just curious. The grad program I'm looking into is in Europe, and I was wondering if there are any recommendations on how to find similar programs in Europe that I'm already looking into, which is like a biomimicry thing. And if you would happen to know of like the best way to go about looking for funding, or if there is funding for Americans doing grad studies in Europe. Yeah.
I can probably answer some of that for you. The very different graduate programs, the way the graduate studies work in Europe, especially England and Germany largely, that I'm familiar with, and they just have a very different approach to the way graduate studies generally tend to work. The very British method is very Pink Floyd-esque, I guess, in terms of they let you load off, and if you don't come back with a project, you don't make it through the program, sort of thing. Punishment is inherent in the process. But there are funding avenues through a lot of European Union organizations now. It's going to be a little more difficult in England now, given the sort of changes in the European Union. But there are all kinds of sources for Americans wanting to work abroad. Like Fulbright funds lots of those things, but also a lot of universities themselves will provide funding. So I think it depends on what kind of research project you want to work on and with whom, and they can probably help you the most in terms of finding the resources that might be available.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes, I was just about to say, Sochi, I know that you have to step off now. Thank you so much for participating and for all of your really amazing responses and answers. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all so much. It was such a pleasure connecting with you all and wishing you all the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Raymond, do you have any feedback on that answer, or?
No, unfortunately, I don't have any experience with abroad and all that, but I wish you luck with that.
Thank you.
you got some advice, so that's good.
Ali asked in the chat, are there any resources available to help research various graduate programs in the field we're looking for? There are so many and it seems overwhelming trying to figure out which ones to try and pursue. Do either of our panelists have any advice in that area or have any experience with how you might have started your search that way?
Allie, my advice would be to come talk to your faculty advisor for your senior exit, which Allie, I think is going to be enrolled in my class possibly next quarter. So one of the ways of helping to refine and narrow down some of your interests is through discussions with mentors and advisors and things like that, without having to go out and read all the manuals and books about all these programs. That's usually pretty helpful, I've found in the past. And I would have never found where I was going if it hadn't been for a handful of people who steered me in to look at certain kinds of disciplines or certain kinds of programs.
Yeah, that's the exact same way I got involved with SF State, as I mentioned before. I talked to both Professor Burry and then also to Professor Barry Nickel in the GIS in the Environmental Studies Department. And that was through my senior exit. So I was in the GIS senior exit for UNVS, and throughout that quarter, we worked together. I worked on my my senior project and talked to Professor Nickel a lot, and then he ended up writing my letter of rec to SF State, and had also worked with my now advisor Jerry Davis, Professor Jerry Davis. So that connection right there. So and then I was considering other other programs, and SF State ended up being the one that just fit the best. And but I know, it could be overwhelming to like look online and Google and these manuals to try to find the grad program. But
Thank you. All right, well, we have about 10 minutes left before the event officially ends. So if anybody has maybe one or two more questions, if they are sort of shorter, we might be able to do two. So yeah, if anybody else has a question, please raise your hand. Or feel free to type it in the chat. Oh, Samantha?
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much for having this panel. It's been really awesome and really cool to hear all your advice about everything. I just recently applied to graduate school. I'm like in the weird waiting phase now. But there's been a lot of advice that you've given throughout the panel, and I think it's all been super duper helpful. I guess it's just like a summarizing thing. If you could only give like one piece of advice or like a single like little thing of like what you would like advise students who are like interested in graduate school, and like interested in like learning more about graduate school, like what's that one piece of advice you would give going forward?
I guess I think being confident in our abilities to learn, and when there is something, like in short, to be confident. Yes, we want to be cautious at the same time. We want to be careful with when you're doing research, or thinking critically about something, the implications of it. Not doubting yourself, or especially like when you're building fundamental things, like confident that you can work at something and solve it or get better at it. And I think in particular for undergrad, like building those foundational skills, whether it's writing or a math course, or and then even in applying to grad school, and then go through that. So, but yeah, that's one thing.
Hey, thank you.
I guess it's just you and I, Ray, really, to Josh, you should jump in. Riri's on our call too. We could draft her.
Yeah, I agree.
My suggestion would be, and I actually tell students, I tell really good students this every once in a while in my office, that at some point in your life, you're going to start hearing no. And I always tell people, I say, welcome to your peer group, where everyone's just as good as you and just as well qualified and has done, and everyone is on the short list for the Nobel Peace Prize. And so hearing no is something you're going to start hearing more of. And it's unfortunate, but it's true. And it means it's not necessarily an insult, it's a compliment. It means basically oftentimes that you're in the same universe as those people who want to do the same thing as you and are just as good as you. And so you don't always get to win everything all the time. So don't take no for an answer is what I always tell people. Just take it as a, okay, I'll try again, or I'll change my plans, or I'll move forward. But don't let it stop you, because that's one of the things that I find to be very risky, is that once you get into those competitive environments, as Raymond's pointed out, you can lose your confidence easily, and don't let it shake you if that's what you end up hearing. I heard no all the time, and it just gets worse as you get older, right? No this, no that. And I just keep shrugging it off and saying, well, I'll just keep working, I'll keep plodding forward because it's something I really care about. And I'm not suggesting you're going to hear no, Samantha. But I do tell people that at some point, whether it's now or long into your future, you will achieve your peer group, and your peer group is where you look to the people around you. You're like, I think they might be better than me, and that's a compliment. Actually, it usually means that you sort of competitively have found the right place for you. And they usually end up being your colleagues and your friends and the people you trust and have confidence in as well, strangely enough. So I always encourage people, go find your peer group, but don't take no for an answer until you get there. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's really great advice. Yeah, no, that's definitely something I'm gonna be keeping in mind when in this cycle right now. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that was just very, very good just advice for things in general, like things in life. That was great. Does anybody else have any more questions? There's still 5 minutes left. If anybody wants to raise their hand or type something into the chat, feel free to do that. I'll wait a minute if anybody is still thinking of things to write or say.
Hi everyone, it's Riri here. Hi. I just want to say this is the most helpful event. And if even I'm listening right now, and it's just been a really wonderful event. But one thing I will say too, if it's at all helpful, but I've just been listening to all of you and advising you all too, and I think it might feel like everyone around you is has their thing figured out, and everything that you do after you graduate is this permanent career. Will I be able to have a family with this? Will I be able to own a home? All these questions that you might have with your post-grad career, but everything's temporary. And one of the things my sister told me when I was about to graduate was, she said that everyone else is just good at looking like they know what they're doing. You're just really bad at it. And so I think it's really good to just think that things are temporary and there's always so much time to figure it out. And it might feel like we're just, going into this pandemic and, it's a hard time to graduate and everything, but we are all here for you, and I'm here for you. And I'm always here to talk to you and advising, and the faculty in EMBS and UCSC are so kind, and the Career Center is great too. And you have so much resource here, and it's all online, and you could just hop in and wherever you are, and talk to us. So I just wanted to extend that too, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Riri. And also thank you so much for supporting this event all the way and helping out with it. I really appreciate it. But that's great advice. Last call for questions. All right, if we're good, then I'll say that that marks the end of the event, the end of our time. I want to thank everyone who came, everyone who's attending right now, and I'd also like to thank especially all of our panelists again, even though only 2 of you are left. Thank you.
Two.
Yeah, it's like the Hunger Games. There can only be one. At this point, you have to fight. I didn't tell you guys the details.
Ray always will win.
But yes, thank you for being here and giving great answers, and thank you to everyone for asking great questions, really in-depth questions. So like I said at the beginning of the event, I will be sharing the link to the document that I've prepared with just some basic online resources. I will also be going back through the recording and making a sort of like a short summary of the responses to everyone's questions that I'll also be emailing out. And then also this event will be uploaded to the Career Success YouTube channel, so you will be able to rewatch it or share it with friends and peers. So again, thank you very much. And everyone have a very good night. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks.